Command nodes were struck. 90 minutes is an extremely long time for a dedicated strike package to work over one small island, and it tells you the intent was not to send a warning, but to systematically remove a capability. When it was over, the crown jewel of the island fortress network, the position Iranian officers had called an unsinkable aircraft carrier for 50 years, had been stripped of the weapons that made it dangerous, in broad daylight in front of the entire world. 9 hours later, a second wave arrived. Then, at 9 o'clock that night, the third wave went in, and this one focused on something that almost never makes headlines, but sits at the absolute center of the entire Mosquito Fleet doctrine: coastal surveillance, radar domes, electro-optical towers, electronic listening posts, maritime monitoring stations scattered across headlands and offshore rocks. Think about what a swarm attack actually requires. To send 20 speedboats racing toward one specific tanker, a commander must know exactly where that tanker is, what heading it is on, how fast it is moving, and when it will reach a particular point. That information does not come from the boats themselves. They are too small and too low to see far. It comes from an integrated network of shore-based sensors feeding a command center. Destroy that network and the swarm becomes blind. That is why the third wave mattered so much. A speedboat crew hiding in a sea cave can still start their engines. They can still race out into open water. But if headquarters can no longer see the shipping lanes, they are racing toward nothing. The most sophisticated part of the entire American campaign was not the explosions people saw on video. It was the deliberate, methodical decision to attack the enemy's ability to see, understand, and coordinate. Weapons can be replaced relatively quickly. Sensor networks, trained operators, buried cables, and integrated command links take years to rebuild, and every day they are missing, the swarm doctrine simply does not function the way it was designed to. Quick pause, because what comes next genuinely changed the rules of naval warfare, and I want as many people as possible to see it. If you have made it this far, drop a like on this video, leave a comment telling me what you think about machines making battlefield decisions, and share this with someone who follows military technology. Let's keep going. 3 days before those daylight strikes on July 12th, something happened inside Iran's most important naval base that historians will still be writing about decades from now. Bandar Abbas sits on the mainland coast, directly overlooking the strait. It is the headquarters of Iranian naval operations in the Gulf, home to dry docks, repair yards, command buildings, and the maintenance facilities that keep the fleet running. It is heavily defended, closely watched, and considered relatively secure precisely because attacking a harbor traditionally requires putting expensive ships and human crews within reach of shore defenses. On that morning, 3 low, dark shapes moved across the water toward the harbor entrance. They carried no crew. There were no American sailors within hundreds of miles of the danger zone. They were Saronic Corsair unmanned surface vessels, autonomous robotic attack boats. They slipped into the harbor, navigated past piers and infrastructure, and struck a submarine and ship maintenance facility. When footage from one of those drones was released publicly, only about 25 seconds long, the defense community reacted with something close to shock. The video shows the water rushing past as the machine closes in, absolutely steady, absolutely calm. Then the target fills the frame, a large yellow maintenance gantry, and hanging beneath it in a lifting sling, completely out of the water, a Ghadir-class diesel-electric submarine undergoing repairs. The image grows larger. The gantry structure fills the screen, and then the feed cuts to black. Understand what you're looking at in that clip. A submarine is one of the most survivable weapons ever created, precisely because once it submerges, finding it becomes extraordinarily difficult. Navies spend billions on sonar, patrol aircraft, and towed arrays just to have a chance of tracking one. But a submarine in a maintenance cradle is not a submarine. It is a very large, very expensive, completely immobile object with its systems dismantled and its crew ashore. It cannot dive. It cannot maneuver. It cannot even float. Destroying it in that condition is like burning a fighter jet inside its hangar. And it was done by a machine that costs a fraction of what the target cost, launched from far away, risking nobody. The specifications of the Corsair explain why every serious military in the world is now studying this strike. It was developed by an American technology company based in Austin, Texas, and it moved from prototype to a major production contract in under a year, which by defense industry standards is almost unheard of. Hundreds of hulls have already been produced. It has a range of roughly 1,000 nautical miles, carries a payload of around 1,000 pounds, and rides so low on the water that conventional marine radar has enormous difficulty separating it from ordinary wave clutter. It needs no mothership hovering nearby. It needs no crew. It navigates on its own, endures long transits without fatigue, and does not experience fear. 3 of them were used at Bandar Abbas, and all 3 reportedly reached their target. That number was not accidental. Sending 3 against one facility is called redundancy. Even if harbor defenses spot one and destroy it, even if a second suffers a mechanical failure, the third still completes the mission. This is the mathematics of cheap autonomous systems, and it inverts a century of naval thinking. Traditionally, attacking a defended harbor meant risking irreplaceable ships and highly trained crews for an uncertain result. Now it means spending relatively inexpensive machines that can be replaced within weeks, with no letters sent home to families if the mission fails. And then there's the question nobody in an official position has answered, the one that hovers over this entire event. Did a human operator, sitting somewhere far away, watch that final approach on a screen and give the order to strike? Or did the onboard system recognize the shape of the submarine, classify it as a valid military target, and execute the final attack on its own? Officials have not clarified this, and their silence is itself remarkable. Because if a machine made that decision independently, then July 12th was not just another combat operation. It was the moment autonomous weapons crossed from theory into practice in a real harbor against a real target with real consequences. That question is going to shape international law, military ethics, and arms control debates for the rest of this century. Regardless of who or what pulled the trigger, the strategic lesson was received instantly. And not only in Tehran. Every nation that keeps warships and submarines in coastal harbors just watched a demonstration of how vulnerable those harbors have become. Naval planners in Beijing watched. Planners in Moscow watched. Analysts in Pyongyang, in Seoul, in Tokyo, and across Europe watched. The implication is simple and unpleasant for anyone who owns a fleet. The safety of a port is no longer guaranteed by distance, by shore batteries, or by the assumption that an enemy will not risk crews. Cheap, patient, uncrewed machines can now travel 1,000 nautical miles and arrive uninvited in numbers. But here's the honest part of this story, the part that separates serious analysis from cheerleading. Even after island fortresses were shattered and submarines destroyed in their cradles, the hardest problem remained unsolved. You cannot eliminate a hidden speedboat fleet from the air alone. The southern Iranian coast is a maze of rocky inlets, uninhabited islets, natural caves, and coral formations. A fiberglass boat tucked under a rock overhang produces almost no radar signature and cannot be seen from above. You cannot bomb a cave when you do not know which of the thousands of caves contains anything. Intelligence assessments during this campaign concluded that even after weeks of intense strikes, roughly half of the small boat force remained intact, dispersed, and waiting. That is why the next American move surprised so many casual observers while making perfect sense to anyone who understands close air support. Aircraft designed during the Cold War to destroy Soviet tank columns in Europe were sent to hunt boats in the Persian Gulf. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, universally known as the Warthog, is unlike anything else flying. It is built around a 7-barrel 30mm Gatling cannon capable of firing thousands of rounds per minute. The pilot sits inside a titanium-armored tub. Its flight controls are redundant. Its engines are mounted high and separated, so that damage to one does not automatically doom the aircraft. It was engineered from the first sketch to fly low, fly slow, absorb punishment, and destroy small moving targets. Put that aircraft over the Gulf at wave-top altitude and something important changes. From a few hundred feet above the water, a pilot can visually distinguish a local fishing trawler full of civilians from an armed attack craft carrying rocket pods. That single capability dramatically reduces the risk of a tragic mistake, something no high-altitude sensor can fully guarantee. If a swarm of speedboats surges out of a cove toward a tanker, an A-10 can roll in and rake them with cannon fire that turns light hulls into debris in seconds. Working alongside Apache attack helicopters carrying laser-guided Hellfire missiles, these aircraft created something the Mosquito fleet had never faced before, a persistent low-altitude hunting layer sitting directly over the water where the boats operate. The sea caves may still be full, but the moment a boat leaves cover, it enters a killing zone. While those aircraft patrolled the surface, the campaign added one more element, aimed not at weapons, but at economics. A naval blockade of Iranian ports was reimposed, and shipping companies worldwide were formally notified. Almost immediately, an unladen oil tanker sailing under a Curacao flag named the Belma tested it, heading toward an Iranian export terminal despite repeated radio warnings to turn away. What happened next was a masterpiece of controlled violence. Instead of sinking the ship, instead of bombing it and risking a crew and an oil spill, forces fired a Hellfire missile directly into the vessel's smokestack. The warhead traveled down the funnel and detonated in the engine spaces, destroying the propulsion machinery. The hull stayed intact. The crew survived. The ship simply stopped moving. That single shot communicated more than 1,000 press statements to every ship owner, charterer, and captain on Earth. The message was unmistakable. The blockade is not paperwork, and it will be enforced with surgical precision from the air. You will not be sunk. You will not be killed. You will simply be left adrift, your cargo undelivered, your schedule destroyed, your insurance claim rejected. In commercial shipping, that outcome is often worse than a dramatic loss because it is predictable, repeatable, and financially ruinous. Transit numbers, which before this conflict ran around 110 vessels per day through the strait, collapsed to a fraction of that figure as operators recalculated their risk. And this is where the entire story circles back to you, wherever you are watching from. Because everything I have described, the burning bunkers on Greater Tunba, the robot boat gliding into Bandar Abbas, the warthog banking over the waves, the missile down the smokestack, exists for one reason: to determine whether a 33-kilometer stretch of ocean stays open. When it narrows, insurance premiums rise. When premiums rise, freight costs rise. When freight costs rise, fuel costs rise. Then fertilizer, then food, then the price of nearly everything on a supermarket shelf in countries that will never hear the name of these islands. Add in the persistent GPS interference reported throughout the strait, pushing vessel positions off by dozens of kilometers on the charts, and even a captain willing to sail must do so half-blind. So where does this leave the strategic balance? 50 years of construction, fortification, and doctrine were built on a single assumption: that geography made Iran untouchable at the mouth of the Gulf, and that the threat of chaos would always be worth more than the cost of retaliation. What this campaign demonstrated is that the assumption has been overturned from several directions at once. Missile bunkers can be opened in daylight, surveillance networks can be blinded in a single night, submarines can be destroyed while hanging in slings, speedboats can be hunted from wavetop altitude by aircraft designed to kill tanks. And harbors once considered sanctuaries can be entered by machines that carry no human life at all. Yet the story is not finished, and honest analysis has to admit that. Roughly half the small boat fleet still exists, hidden in caves along a coastline that no air campaign can fully map. Missiles are still launched. Officials still insist the strait remains under their control. That defiance reveals something important about how the other side reads its own position. They believe the ability to frighten global commerce, even in a badly degraded form, is still worth absorbing tremendous punishment. Whether that judgment survives the loss of their eyes, their launchers, their submarines, and their forward island platforms is now the central question hanging over the entire region. The islands are still there. Greater Tumb, Lesser Tumb, and Abu Musa still sit in the same water, catching the same sunlight, watching the same shipping lanes they have watched for 50 years. But the myth attached to them has been broken. They were never unsinkable aircraft carriers. They were fixed positions with known coordinates, and in an age of precision weapons and autonomous machines, being fixed is no longer strength. It is a vulnerability written permanently onto a map. What happened in those few days did not just damage a network of bunkers and radars. It quietly announced the end of an era in which geography alone could hold the world hostage, and the beginning of one in which the machines arrive first, the crews stay home. And the oldest fortresses on Earth discover they were never fortresses at all. What happens to the most dangerous weapon on Earth when your opponent quietly builds a way to make it completely useless? For decades, a single narrow strip of water gave one nation the power to freeze the global economy in an instant. But a massive new steel artery through the desert has just broken that chokehold forever. If you want to stay ahead of the real geopolitical news that mainstream media consistently ignores, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel right now, and share this video with someone who needs to understand the true forces shaping our world today. To understand why this development is shaking the foundations of global power, you first have to grasp the sheer terror that geography has imposed on the modern world for over half a century. Look at a map of the Middle East, and your eyes will immediately be drawn to the Persian Gulf. This is the energy heartland of human civilization. Beneath the sands and underwater shelves of this region lie the world's most richest deposits of crude oil and natural gas. Every single day, a massive river of energy flows out of the terminals of Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar. But there's a terrifying catch to this vast wealth. All of that energy, amounting to roughly 20 million barrels of oil every 24 hours, has only one natural exit to the open ocean. That single door is the Strait of Hormuz. At its narrowest point, this critical waterway is barely 21 miles wide. When you factor in the shallow waters, rocky islands, and the strict navigational corridors required for massive supertankers to pass safely without colliding, the actual shipping lanes shrink down to just 2 miles wide in each direction. And sitting directly along the entire northern shoreline of that tiny corridor is the Islamic Republic of Iran. For decades, Iranian military strategists have understood a fundamental truth. Whoever controls that narrow stretch of water holds a loaded gun to the head of the global economy. 1/5 of the entire planet's daily petroleum consumption must pass through that specific door. Alongside that ocean of oil flows a massive stream of liquefied natural gas, which heats homes, powers factories, and keeps electrical grids running across Europe and Asia. Over the course of the recent escalating conflict, Iran decided to pull the trigger on that weapon. Using a sophisticated combination of fast attack boats, naval mines dropped silently in the dark, anti-ship missiles hidden in coastal mountains, and swarms of attack drones. Iranian forces turned the world's most important shipping corridor into a no-go zone. The impact was immediate and devastating. In normal peacetime conditions, nearly 90 massive cargo vessels and energy tankers would sail safely through the Strait of Hormuz every single day. As the attacks intensified, that number did not just dip, it collapsed completely. Daily maritime transits plummeted to barely a dozen ships attempting the dangerous crossing. By every independent economic measure, this became the single most severe disruption of energy supplies in recorded human history. Why has this specific military tactic been so impossible for Western superpowers to defeat? Why couldn't the world's most advanced navies simply clear the water and restore normal trade? The answer lies in the difference between military targets and physical geography. You can launch an airstrike against a missile radar site. You can destroy an enemy ammunition depot. You can sink a hostile warship or neutralize a command bunker. But you cannot bomb geography. You cannot use an explosive missile to make a narrow strait wider. You cannot push the Iranian coastline further away from the shipping lanes. No matter how many fighter jets are patrolling the skies, or how many destroyers are sailing the waters, the Strait of Hormuz remains a tiny physical bottleneck. As long as the world's oil ships are forced to sail within range of coastal mountains hidden on the northern shore, the leverage remains intact. This brings us to the most brilliant and sinister aspect of Iran's strategy. When Tehran threatens to shut down the Strait of Hormuz, who is actually suffering the greatest economic damage? It is not Iran itself. Iran's own oil exports make up only a small fraction of the total volume flowing through that channel. The true hostages in this high-stakes game are Iran's wealthy Arab neighbors: Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Iraq, and Qatar. These nations rely on that single maritime highway to get their primary source of national income out to international buyers. By turning the waterway into a battle zone, Iran effectively held the entire regional economy hostage all at once. This gave them an ultimate bargaining chip, an indestructible form of political and economic extortion that could not be solved by brute military force alone. For months, the world watched helplessly as oil prices spiked, shipping rates soared, and diplomats scrambled to negotiate a reopening of the corridor. It seemed like Iran held an unbeatable hand of cards. But while global news networks were fixated on the daily exchanges of missile fire and naval skirmishes, something much bigger, quieter, and far more permanent was unfolding in the desert sands of the Arabian Peninsula. One nation decided that it would never again allow its national survival to depend on a stretch of water controlled by a hostile neighbor. That nation was the United Arab Emirates, and their countermove has quietly rewritten the rules of Middle Eastern geopolitics. The state-owned energy giant of the UAE, the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company, recently confirmed a development that sent shockwaves through the global energy sector, even if the general public barely noticed. They announced that construction on a massive, hyper-engineered crude oil pipeline designed specifically to bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely has just crossed the halfway completion mark. According to top energy executives directing the project, this new underground infrastructure will double the oil export capacity of a port city called Fujairah. To understand why that specific city is the key to unlocking the Iranian trap, you have to look at where it sits on the map. Unlike the major export terminals of Abu Dhabi and Dubai, which are located inside the enclosed waters of the Persian Gulf, Fujairah is positioned on the eastern coast of the United Arab Emirates. It faces directly out into the open waters of the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. By building a massive network of pipes stretching from the inland desert oil fields directly across the rugged Hajar mountain range to the port of Fujairah, the UAE has created a secret escape route. Oil loaded onto supertankers at Fujairah never has to sail anywhere near the contested Strait of Hormuz. It never enters the danger zone. It completely bypasses the mines, the coastal missiles, and the fast attack boats patrolling the northern coastline. Before we dive into the fascinating engineering behind this mega project and how it physically shields global oil from naval warfare, take a brief moment to support deeply researched, independent geopolitical analysis. We don't rely on clickbait or surface-level summaries here. If you value understanding the quiet economic chess moves that truly decide global conflicts, please leave a quick comment below with your thoughts, smash the like button, and make sure you're subscribed with notifications turned on so you never miss our next deep dive. What makes this new pipeline project so revolutionary is not just its geographic destination, but the sheer speed at which it is being built and the massive scale of its capacity. Under normal peacetime conditions, constructing hundreds of kilometers of high-pressure, heavy steel petroleum pipeline across rocky mountains and scorching desert terrain is a monumental task that takes many years of slow, bureaucratic planning. But the ongoing war in the region triggered a massive acceleration. The UAE government poured billions of dollars in emergency capital into the project, treating it not just as a commercial venture, but as a vital matter of national security and economic survival. The project has been fast-tracked at an unprecedented pace, with completion and full operational flow scheduled to go live by 2027. When this new pipeline network is fully online, it will double the existing capacity of the Fujairah export hub. To put that into perspective, we must examine the infrastructure that was already in place before this new acceleration began. The United Arab Emirates has operated the Abu Dhabi crude oil pipeline since 2012. That existing system stretches across 380 kilometers of harsh desert, moving roughly 1.5 million barrels of oil every day from inland fields directly to the ocean coast. Meanwhile, their neighbor, Saudi Arabia, has been operating an even larger bypass system known as the East-West Pipeline, or Petroline. This massive Saudi steel river runs all the way across the entire breadth of the Arabian Peninsula, carrying crude oil from the eastern oil fields near the Persian Gulf directly to the Red Sea port of Yanbu, completely avoiding the Strait of Hormuz. Combined, these existing bypass systems in Saudi Arabia and the UAE were already moving anywhere between 3.5 million to over 5 million barrels of oil per day, safely around the Iranian chokepoint during the height of the crisis. Some official reports even suggest that during peak emergency operations, Saudi Arabia pushed its western pipeline system to pump as much as 7 million barrels a day. But even with those impressive numbers, a massive gap remained. The global economy still needed the roughly 20 million barrels that historically flowed through the main maritime strait, because existing pipelines could not handle the total regional output. The blockade still caused extreme pain. Global crude oil benchmarks skyrocketed to nearly $120 a barrel at the peak of the panic, and remained dangerously elevated for months, threatening global recession and severe inflation. This is precisely why the UAE's new accelerated pipeline initiative is such a game changer. By doubling the export capacity at Fujairah, the UAE is systematically closing that remaining gap. They are building a world where the sheer volume of alternative overland transport becomes large enough to absorb the shock of a maritime closure. But to truly appreciate the genius of this strategy, we have to look past simple barrel counts and understand the mechanics of political leverage. Why does an underground pipe destroy the value of a naval weapon, even if it doesn't replace every single drop of oil that used to sail on ships? The secret lies in the concept of vulnerability. A supertanker is a colossal, slow-moving steel beast. When it sails through a narrow channel, it is completely exposed on the surface of the water. It cannot maneuver quickly to avoid an incoming drone, and its thin outer hull is highly vulnerable to underwater mines. Furthermore, a ship cannot sail without insurance and a willing crew. When a waterway is declared a high-risk combat zone, maritime insurance syndicates charge astronomical premiums that can exceed the value of the oil inside the ship. In many cases, insurers simply pull their coverage entirely. At the same time, international labor organizations and maritime unions advise seafarers to avoid the region to protect human lives. Capitalism and human safety protocols effectively shut down an ocean corridor long before a naval missile even hits a target. A pipeline, on the other hand, operates on a completely different set of physical and economic rules. It is buried deep beneath the earth and encased in concrete and steel. It is immune to naval mines. It cannot be boarded by hostile commandos. It does not require a terrified crew of sailors to navigate through dark, dangerous waters. It does not pay daily maritime war risk insurance premiums. It simply pumps liquid energy silently 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, driven by automated electrical pumping stations. Now, a critical mind might ask, are pipelines truly invincible? Could an adversary simply shift their targeting from ocean tankers to inland pipeline infrastructure? The historical record of this very conflict gives us a clear and revealing answer. In the early months of the blockade, Iranian-backed forces did, in fact, attempt to target alternative infrastructure. Long-range attack drones were launched at storage tanks in Fujairah, causing localized fires and temporary pauses in loading operations. Similarly, drone strikes targeted remote pumping stations along the Saudi east-west pipeline in an attempt to sever that land bridge. These attacks prove beyond a shadow of a doubt that Iranian leadership fully understands the mortal threat that these pipelines pose to their strategic leverage. They know that if the pipelines succeed, their maritime blockade loses its power. However, the aftermath of those pipeline attacks revealed a stunning difference in operational resilience. When a drone hits a pumping station or damages a section of above-ground steel pipe, engineers and repair crews can rush to the scene, weld new sections of pipe, replace damaged valves, and restore full operational flow within a matter of days, sometimes even hours. When Saudi Aramco suffered a direct hit on its pipeline system, full pumping capacity was fully restored in less than 72 hours. Compare that physical resilience to a maritime blockade. Once a waterway is seeded with naval mines and declared an active combat zone, commercial shipping halts for months on end. You cannot quickly repair trust in an ocean shipping lane, but you can weld a piece of steel pipe in an afternoon. This fundamental difference in resilience is why infrastructure is beating military extortion. We are just getting to the most critical part of this story, how this permanent shift in infrastructure is tearing apart the balance of power across the Middle East and leaving certain nations completely defenseless. To help us keep bringing you these comprehensive, unsponsored documentaries, please consider sharing this link on your social media or in your favorite discussion groups. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe right now to join our growing community of viewers who care about how the world truly works behind the scenes.